So first, just providing a little bit of a timeline of the VEP. The VEP was announced on April 14th, 2000, and that was the first time it was announced to shareholders and the public. Then the Visteon spinoff would come later in July 28th, 2000. And Visteon was the parts unit that would be spun off to shareholders. The final terms of announcement would be on July 28th, 2000, in which stockholders who chose share options would receive 0.748 new Ford shares instead of the $20 cash. That was the day that was announced. And on August 1st, 2000, shareholders would have to vote whether they wanted the VEP or not. So the street reaction to the VEP was generally positive, which was partially promoted by the fact that the VEP was the first time in over 10 years that Ford had returned cash to shareholders. Additionally, Gursky provided that the VEP was faster and more efficient than a traditional stock buyback would have been, considering that a buyback can take years and ultimately have little or no effect on Ford's stock price. The VEP was also praised for cultivating an effective balance between the interests of the Ford family and shareholders, as the VEP provided a versatile array of options that satisfied a variety of investment desires. The Ford family would have greater liquidity without losing any voting power, while shareholders would have the option to choose between receiving cash or additional Ford equity. However, there were some concerns regarding whether the distribution of cash would decrease Ford's heavy spending on acquisitions, especially given the pre-existing heavy consolidation within the automotive industry. Furthermore, Ford has continued interest in acquisitions in the month that have followed the VEP, showing that this is of little or no concern. Some shareholder objections include objections from groups such as the Teachers Annuity and Insurance Association of College Requirement Equities Fund, or the TIAF, TIA-CREF for short, and the California Public Employees Retirement System, or CalPERS for short, which owned 8.4 million shares and 6.5 million shares respectively. And some of their objections included the fact that the VEP was a bad precedent, as it would give the family the opportunity to decrease their equity stake without the loss of any voting rights. Another issue was that the Class B shares would receive common shares, which pay dividends, which is prohibited under Ford's policy. Additionally, the groups promoted the fact that there were a variety of other alternative mechanisms that would have successfully increased shareholder value while avoiding the dilution of investors' equity. So as you can see in the graph, there's a comparison drawn between Ford's stock price and the S&P 500 price from April 3rd, 2000 through early September 2000. And for the purpose of our analysis, we're just going to be focusing on the data within the black box, which is ranging from April 3rd, 2000 through July 31st, 2000. And the graph shows that there's a direct correlation between the volatility of the S&P 500 and the Ford stock price. And the correlation between this volatility is also promoting the fact that the automotive industry is exceptionally sensitive to economic cycles.
So clearly the VEP is a complex program, and there were a lot of opinions on both sides. And so a natural thing to do is to explore the alternatives to the VEP program. Many of them could have achieved management's goals. The problem was that they pose a lot of challenges when balancing the interests of shareholders in the Ford family. Traditionally, the Ford family preferred dividends because they didn't dilute their voting power. Unfortunately, the method was not favored by shareholders because the dividends were taxed as regular income. Buybacks would have been taxed as capital gains. However, the Ford family did not want to dilute their holdings. And as mentioned, they did still have considerable influence over policy. Therefore, buybacks were uncommon. Jack and Gabby are now going to help us build into the specifics of the alternatives, which will provide information that we will use to build up to our recommendation.
Dividend payments and share repurchases are the two most common ways in which management can redistribute cash to their shareholders. Keeping this in mind, both come with sets of pros and cons. They both provide an additional signaling effect as well as the initial payout. A dividend is defined as a percentage of a company's net earnings that are distributed to shareholders and is typically decided based on class of stock. Types of dividends include stock dividends, stock splits, and cash dividends. They're sticky and can't be manipulated frequently. Decreasing a dividend can signal to investors that the company is being squeezed for cash or is in a poor financial position. On the other hand, increasing dividends too much can demonstrate a lack of growth and investment opportunities within the firm, which may hinder its outlook. Firms can also buy back shares from stakeholders using one of four methods of repurchasing, including buying shares on the market, tendering offers to shareholders, Dutch auction, and private negotiation. Buybacks can be perceived as a means of manipulating stock prices, but as Jack will discuss in further detail later, can have positive tax implications for the investor. Continuing with this discussion, Ford primarily uses dividends as their main method of redistributing cash to shareholders. Largely influenced by the Ford family super vote, they have grown their dividends at a 5-year compounded annual growth rate of approximately 15.6%, while also maintaining a payout ratio of 32.08% in 2000, which shows that they have room for further cash distribution, which echoes Dima's earlier discussion of poor cash management. As of July 28, 2000, their stock yielded a dividend that marginally exceeded 4%. Given this information, Jack will now discuss the implications of pursuing an alternative payout plan.
A dividend could have been satisfied the desire of management to support a stock price that was lower than usual in the short term and create sentiment that would boost opinions of the company in the broader market. This option would not have diluted the voting rights of the Ford family and was the policy in place prior to instituting the VEP, as it preserved the voting power of the Ford family. This was not ideal, however, because the dividends were tax inefficient for the certain shareholders. In regards to the distribution of dividends to shareholders and to further implement an even more beneficial plan, the Ford Corporation could choose to distribute a more tax lenient form of compensation known as a qualified dividend. Instead of the distributed dividend received by the shareholder being taxed at the income tax rate, a qualified dividend would fall under the capital gains tax criterion, which would be considerably lower than the income tax rate. In certain situations, the shareholder may evade the taxes levied upon the acquisition of the dividend altogether. The end result would be more cash in the hands of the shareholders, making the qualified dividend a most likely best option as a form of dividend compensation. The other alternative was buying back the shares. A share buyback was also a viable option to achieve management's goals. It would deliver excess cash to shareholders, lead to EPS accretion, and an increase in the share price. There would also have been a bit of positive psychology at play if investors were to interpret the stock buyback as a sign the Ford stock price should be higher, which may have led to a greater upswing in the stock's price. It would have resulted, however, in dilution of the Ford family's voting rights, as it would have involved the sale of Class B shares back to the firm, and therefore was not a favored policy. It also would have possibly been viewed as not the best use of capital, as a shareholder may have questioned why Ford was not engaging in acquisitions, product development, and generally any activities that could grow the company. Now that we have described the connotations of the alternative payout plans, Sahil will next discuss our final recommendation.
Thanks, Jack. Clearly, there's a lot of angles here. One thing that we noted was that the constancy of the Ford family's ownership stake, and therefore their involvement in distribution decisions would have to be a key factor in our recommendation process. It was very apparent to management and subsequently to us that a compromise needed to be made. And absent additional information, it does appear that the VEP was generally a fine policy in that regard. The VEP offered the tax shields that were important to dividend-seeking investors, an opportunity to build a long position for those interested in holding Ford's equity and perhaps being bullish on Ford's equity. And it protected the Ford family from voting power dilution, while also allowing them to build a common equity position in case they had liquidity needs. Finally, and importantly, it did achieve management's goal of delivering excess cash to shareholders to boost their stock price and to convince the market that their shares were overvalued. So in effect, it offered the benefits of the alternatives, plus some flexibility and a very succinct policy. That's it. Thank you so much for paying attention. We appreciate it, and we are happy to take any questions you've got.